My name is Hannes. You might recognize me from last year's Community Day. Who was there? Okay, we're friends. For those of you who were not there, we're still friends. You're here, okay. So, my name is Hannes. I work for this company called Made with Love. It's a great company. We make things with love with PHP and JavaScript, especially Laravel PHP. We have about 17 and counting employees, or colleagues, lovely colleagues. Some of them are here, so great to have them. So we have 17 colleagues all over the world, in Europe, Africa, South America. I would love to have some colleagues in the USA and Canada, though. So, besides besides working, I also love to run. A little over a week ago, I finished this 100 kilometer, that's 62 miles, run at night in 10 hours and 36 minutes. It's a huge win for me. Thank you. But that's not what you're here for. So let's talk about package development. This talk is divided into 3 chapters. The first is beginner steps, then intermediate tips. There's a lot of them, but I won't spend all your time with intermediate tips. And then I will continue with some decoupling for stability. What that is, I will explain to you later. So beginner steps. Everyone started out as a newbie. If you haven't started yet, you're still a newbie, but after this first chapter, you're no longer a newbie. I did this talk a few times, but this guy, Jonathan, you might recognize him from the PHP League website, he created this website called phppackagechecklist.com. It's this site. It's a huge help for people starting out with 14 points to remember. The first thing is to pick a name wisely. PHP package names are usually vendor name / package name. The vendor name should be something like your company name, like Made with Love, or something like your GitHub organization name, like Friends of PHP, Friends of Symfony, something like that. The package name after the vendor name should be something that says what it does. If it's an HTTP client, then use company name / HTTP client, and so on. The reason why this is important is because there's no renaming. Once you commit, it's out there. Your package is out there, everyone installs it with that name. If you want to rename it, you need to publish it again with a different name, with a different version number, like Guzzle did. Create your code, push it to GitHub. Nice talk by Lorna on Git. I liked it. So host it openly with GitHub or Bitbucket. I suggest using GitHub because there's a lot more people on GitHub and you get a lot more contributions. Also, we live in 2015, so we use PSR for autoloading. It's a huge win. Nobody needs to require your classes. PSR 4 is actually just a standard, but it's implemented by Composer. So Composer has an autoloader, so if you distribute your code with Composer, you get the autoloader for free. If you register your package on packages.org, people can search for your package. Like, I need an HTTP client, so I search HTTP client. I get Guzzle and a ton of other stuff. To install stuff with Composer, you should install it with the Composer require and then the package name. Don't try to edit your composer.json file. Leave it alone. Just use the composer require. I think Mitchell made that meme, right? Also, if you create a package, you want it to be installed in all sorts of applications. Old, new, Laravel, Symfony, any type of application. So you want your package to be framework agnostic, or just framework independent, if you don't know what agnostic means. You don't want to limit to one framework. So a lot of frameworks come with classes like the config repository class from Symfony, from, of course, Illuminate from Laravel. If you inject that inside your constructor, with your constructor, then it basically means that you rely on the Illuminate support package, or config package. Or if you use a facade, then you use the Illuminate support package. Which means that if your package is installed, the Illuminate support package will be installed as well. Or have to be installed. So a better thing to do is to inject an array of options rather than a concrete class name or object, and then just use the service provider to inject the options. In that way, your package is a lot more agnostic. Follow a code style. This removes the personal opinion from code style. Use an existing code style, like PSR2. Laravel wasn't PSR2 always, but that's for reasons, you know. If you use a standardized code style, you get the benefits of some tooling like PHP CS or PHP CS Fixer, or Style CI or Nitpick CI for checking on things. And this removes the personal touch. So if you have code, you can actually focus on the functionality rather than the code style. Also, do it as early as possible. If you have some existing code with your personal code style, and then you commit to PSR2, you will lose all your Git history. If you do git blame, you bump into some huge commits with some code style changes, or some code style changes. In the case of Laravel, it was like 600 files changed. Also, if you have a ton of open pull requests, all of those need to be rebased or repatched or something. So do it as early as possible. Konstantin said, if your package doesn't have tests or specs, it doesn't exist for me, so you should write some tests. This is your insurance in two ways. Your code is going to run in other people's production. You don't want your bug in someone else's production. That's bad. Also, if people make some changes and make a pull request, and they change some functionality, but you're not aware, then you should have some tests to back you up. Next thing is documentation inside code. We're still in PHP 5.star phase. Not a lot of people use PHP 7 in production yet. It's still in beta, so we don't have return type hints. So doc block your return types. It's useful in IDEs. If you get an object returned, you immediately get auto-completion on that new object. So doc blocking is useful. Your package is out there. It changes from time to time, so you might want to tag some releases. This is how the code was at this point in time. This is how the code was in that point in time. So some versioning is at hand, or is needed. So use semantic versioning. There's a website, semver.org. If you haven't read it yet, read it, or read it again, because it's really useful. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on Semver. A lot of people did that before, so read semver.org. Also, you're changing your code, release as often as possible. Even the slightest change can help. If you have a lot of changes, it becomes a high burden to release a new version. There's a lot of packages that have been in beta development for ages, so just make it as smallest changes as possible and release as often as possible. So you have releases, you have changes, you need to document them as well. Keep a changelog. Actually, keepachangelog.com is a format for changelogs. You should, as releases as well, do it as often as possible. If you have little amount of changes, you don't need to document much. This is the format on keepachangelog.com. It also has an unreleased block, which is really useful, because if you haven't released it yet, you at least have one place where all the documentation goes from what has changed since the last version. You can use this documentation inside your releases tab inside GitHub. At Made with Love, we built an internal tool called changelog.io, which collects all your change logs from pull request descriptions. It aggregates them and puts them in the unreleased tab. If you hit the button in below and just add a release tag, like this version, I want this to tag this version, it will automatically create this release notes. Also, if it's a new major version, you might have some breaking changes. You might need to help people getting to the new major version, so an upgrade guideline might be necessary. So you have tests, but you need some continuous integration platform to run the tests when somebody sends a pull request or when you push the new change. There's a lot of services like Nitpick CI, thank you Adam, Style CI, Travis CI, Scrutinizer CI, and Circle CI, all continuous integration platforms. What happens is, you're at the BC, you make a commit, you push it to GitHub. GitHub will send a webhook to the test service, whether that's Circle CI or Travis CI. It sends it to all the test services that you configured. Also, it sends a webhook to Packagist. The test service will run the tests, and Packagist will analyze your composer.json file, and it will also store the current version that you tagged, if it's a git push of a tag. The test service will then return green or return red and notify you inside GitHub. So I mentioned composer require, the installation instructions, and I mentioned the changelog, but you should actually write more than that for documentation. Something that I find very useful is code samples. If you go to a new package, you haven't used it yet, you see some installation instructions, you copy-paste it into terminal, you install that. If you have some code samples, you just copy and paste that, and you run the code. And that's the quickest verification to see if that package does what you require it to do. So a clean bit of code samples tells you how useful that package is for you. Next up, a license. No license is the worst. It means that no one can use your code. No one. So if you don't know which license to use, go to chooselicense.com. It's a GitHub project. If you have Laravel/framework installed with all its dependencies and you run the composer licenses command, it will show you a list of all the licenses of all the packages, and you will see that most of them are MIT licensed. So if you don't know which license to use MIT license or go to chooselicense.com. You're not alone. There's a lot of developers on GitHub. So you want to welcome contributions. You want to welcome other developers to help with your package. So give some documentation on how to write some tests, how to make a pull request, what do you require from a change, how do you think about this package, what is the philosophy behind this. You don't want to have some methods that are merged in by some other developer that are this long, and your philosophy is to have short abbreviated methods. So have some philosophy, if you have some, and write it down in the contributing.md file. So those were the 14 tips on phpPackageChecklist.com. So congrats, you're no longer a newbie. 2 small tips, 2 small CLI commands that you can use are Jonathan Torres /construct package. It has a generate command, which generates a huge, a folder with the source folder and a composer.json file. It will run git init if you like. It will add the license file. It will add the test suite. So it's one little command that can help you set up a new package in less than 30 seconds. Also, Frans Liedtke Studio package is very useful. If you have an existing package and you want it autoloaded in a different environment, like a new application, but you don't want to install it via Composer, so you can actually work on it while using it in a different package. So the Frans Liedtke load command is very useful. On to the next chapter, intermediate tips. If you're used to make applications, you know that your application has a local environment, maybe a CI environment, and a production environment. Think of packages as the same. It has environments too. It has a local environment, or dev, whatever you want to name it, a test or CI environment, whatever you want to name it, and a production environment. So when you're developing your application, it's a local. If it's being tested on a test service like Nitpick CI, it's in CI environment or Travis CI or whatever. If it's in production, then it's actually installed in someone else's application. So that's the production environment. Once you get that idea of multiple environments for your package, you can define some environment-specific variables or tools. For example, if you have a dependency for your package, like I want some test suite or I want some profiling on my package or my code, I want to install it locally and in CI, but not in production. So that's why there's a composer required --dev flag. Also, code coverage. You want to run code, you want to collect statistics on the code coverage of your tests. But that's something that you only want in CI environment. So there's a coverage HTML flag if you want to have some HTML generated pages on your code coverage, but there's also the coverage clover flag to export the XML, and then you can use the ocular tool to upload it to Scrutinizer. So we have these environments, right? Your tests are for you. You want to run them locally and in CI, but not in other people's production. So if people install your package, why should they have your test files or your stubs? If people install your package with preferred DISTS, what a composer will actually do is go to GitHub's API and download the zip file and unzip it, of course. So you can actually control what is in that zip file using the git attributes file. It's used for a lot of stuff, ask Lorna, but you can use it to ignore some files and some folders to be included inside that zip file. So this example is from Guzzle. It has a build folder, a docs folder, a test folder, and a bunch of config files that don't matter in other people's production or in other people's applications. So you can actually add export ignore statements on these files. Using the git attributes file, you can ignore a git attributes file. How meta. So your tests are not being sent to other people's production, so you should also not autoload them. And that's why there's this autoload dev block in composer.json file. So if Guzzle were to have some stubs files, it doesn't have, but I just adjusted this example. If it were to have some stub files, then it would be autoloaded with autoloaded dev. Anyone heard about composer scripts? Composer scripts are actually executables that are installed inside the vendor/bin. So there's a tool called PHP CS Fixer, and it's installed inside vendor/bin. You actually don't want to write vendor/bin/PHP CS Fixer fix every time you want to fix your code style. You can add some scripts, or some custom scripts, inside your composer.json file using the scripts block. When you've done this, you can use composer.cs, everything's fixed. By default, it will look for the PHP CS Fixer command inside the vendor/bin folder first before looking for a global installation. You can also add multiple commands at the same time. So if you have multiple test suites, you can just run composer test, and it will install PHP unit, and it will run PHP spec. Some scripts are like the Jonathan Torres CLI tool. It has a construct file that starts with a hashbang. That's what they call it, a hashbang, /user/bin/env PHP, and then the opening PHP tag. If you want to expose this construct CLI file, then you should add it to your compose.json file with this bin object. Also, if you have some composer scripts, and you want to run them in your dev environment, but you don't need them in the CI environment, it's best to install them globally. So Composer require -- global. So it's not included inside your requirements. I mentioned code style before, because it removes personal preference, but you can go further than PSR2 as well. There's the Symfony code style guidelines with a bunch more rules. Some are useful, some are less useful. The other conditions, I don't get the point of that. But one of them is if you new up with a constructor and the constructor hasn't got any arguments, then you are still required to use the parentheses. A second one is the multi-line array trailing comma rule. Basically, if you new up or if you create a new array with a lot of keys and values, the actual last line, if it's a multi-line array, should have a trailing comma. It's useful for cleaner diffs. Also, if you commit some code style changes, do it in a separate commit. It removes someone who's reviewing your code from having to see if a specific change is a code style change or a functional change. So if they just filter out the code style changes and remove and look at the functional commits, then they can actually review what has functionally changed. So for intermediate tips, we talked about separate environments, composer scripts, and code style. Obligatory iceberg slide. There's a ton more you can talk about. Like you can also talk about the carrot versus tilde constraint, semver checker, marketing, how to market your package, empathy, empathize with contributors, and the composer sort packages flag. There's a ton more you can talk about, but I'm gonna keep it at this. Love you, Matt Stauffer. Decouple for stability. This is the last chapter. So, you have this package, right? Or let's start over. You work at a company, you built a SaaS product or something, and you want to make people engage with your SaaS product more, so you trying to build an SDK. Your SaaS product probably has an API. The API uses HTTP to communicate with it, so you need an HTTP client. The SDK needs an HTTP client. There's a couple of ways to do this. Shall we roll our own, make our own HTTP client? There's some benefits, there's some downsides. Let me show you an example of some people who did this. There's the PHP OAuth package that has an included HTTP client. Why, I don't know. But somebody made a pull request. He added an email field for vContact, which is the Russian Facebook, if I'm correct. The build failed. Why? I inspected it, because the curl client test failed. Not really related with vContact, right? So I inspected further, and what happened was that it had some integration tests for the HTTP client using httpbin.org, which is a tool where you can send post requests and get something useful back to make some integration tests for your HTTP client. That service was down, so all pull requests build failed. Not very useful. I could spend the next 15 minutes explaining why or when not to roll your own or not, but Phil Sturgeon wrote a wonderful blog post about this. Is there one out there that does what I want, and if so, can I use it? That's the main question. As it turns out, there's a lot of HTTP clients out there. There's Buzz, there's Guzzle. Who uses Guzzle? There's a ton more. So it's better to use an existing HTTP client. So what you do as an SDK is, okay, Composer require Guzzle HTTP/Guzzle. This will install v6 right now. There are some people out there using Guzzle v4 or v5. They will say, I cannot install your SDK because I'm stuck with v4 and I can't upgrade. And people will cry. Some people will say, I have Buzz HTTP client, or Cake HTTP client if you're using Cake PHP. So a lot of people will say, I don't want to use your package, your SDK, because I already have my HTTP client set up with logging and profiling in my IOC container, and I don't want to do the same with Guzzle for whatever reason. So they might say, I don't want to use your package because I already use a great HTTP client. So what you should do is decouple. You don't want to say, if you install my SDK, you need to use this implementation of an HTTP client. You don't want to do that. So you need to decouple. Luckily, there's a project called PHP HTTP/adapter interface, which has an interface for an HTTP adapter. And it uses PSR7, HTTP message objects, which is standardized way to define request and response objects. So it goes like this. There's an adapter, which is an interface. You can't tell because it doesn't have the interface suffix naming. So it has an HTTP adapter interface with one method. Send a PSR7 request object. And it will return a PSR7 response object. Very simple, very abstract. No implementation whatsoever. So when you're building your SDK, you should include inject an HTTP adapter with the constructor injection, like this. Inject this, doesn't matter which implementation, this interface inside the constructor. There's an optional, if you don't like to build your own request object, there's an optional client that has a get, put, post, delete method, where you can just enter a URL and some extra headers, and then it will return a PSR7 response object. You don't need to build your own request objects. There's a couple of adapters already on packages.org, like Guzzle 5 adapter, a Guzzle 6 adapter. There's no Guzzle 4 because it's already end of life. There's also a mock adapter and a Buzz, Send2, Send1, and Cake in progress, so it's not published yet. This project has been used by the Friends of Symphony /HTTP Cache project. Before it was PHP HTTP, it belonged to Erik Geloen, if I'm right, and it had all the adapters in one repository. Now it's more decoupled, so better. And that one was used by Geocoder and Swap, which is something for exchange rate, some SDK, so good decoupling there. It could be used by the Leak Fly system, OAuth2 client, or a DigitalOcean SDK, or whatever SDK. It could be used by those packages, once it's stable. So decoupling is useful. I've just shown you an HTTP client decoupling use case, but it's also useful for logging. There's the PSR logger interface, which is very useful if you don't want to tie into Monolog, for example. Anyone uses something else than Monolog? Okay. There's also the Fly system package, which allows people to define whatever file system interface to use, or file system implementation to use, if they want to write their images to Amazon, or Dropbox, or MongoDB. I don't know why you should do that, but you can abstract it with Fly system. Sadly, there's no abstract interface yet for caching. They're working on it, but they're still discussing, so this can take a while. So decoupling requires interfaces. And interfaces have implementations. So you require an interface, and people can choose which implementation to use. Interfaces have implementations. And there's this concept on packages.org called a virtual package. A virtual package is essentially a placeholder for a dependency on some implementation. You lost me? Still with me? Okay. A virtual package is basically, you say, I depend on an adapter implementation, a PHP adapter HTTP adapter implementation, but I don't want to define which implementation you should use. So I just define a dependency on this virtual package, like PHP HTTP adapter implementation. I require this, but this orange box, it's a virtual package. You cannot install this. So there's a Guzzle 6 adapter, which provides this implementation. It also has a dependency on Guzzle, of course, and a dependency on PHP HTTP adapter, because that package includes the interface. So this adapter implementation implements this interface, so it needs to be autoloaded, so it needs a dependency. If someone would install your SDK, it would say, Composer require company / SDK. Composer will say, nope, can't do, because this company SDK has a dependency on a virtual package. And this virtual package I cannot install. You need to say, I want to install this PHP HTTP adapter, Guzzle 6 adapter. And there you have it, the whole dependency graph. It might be overwhelming, maybe, but basically, I draw it this way because the application is in the bottom. It's the least stable box of all of the boxes on the screen because it changes a lot. It changes the most of all these packages, so it's the least stable. Note that all arrows are pointing upwards towards more stable packages. Also note that the adapter implementation is all the way at the top, so it's the most stable package out there, because it never changes, because it's a virtual package. So, as a recap, you should always require on the stablest packages as possible. If possible, depend on a virtual package, because that's the most stable of all. As a package maintainer, this has some benefits. You don't change this often, so you have less major releases. Your users, the users of your package, they can actually choose which implementation to use. So they can choose which low-level packages to use. Also, users don't get locked in to Guzzle v4 or v5. They can seamlessly upgrade if they want. So, as a recap for this chapter, there's a single responsibility principle for packages as well. Your package should do only one thing and do that thing good or great. Also, always try to decouple from the implementation. Try to use interfaces. Try to let other people use which implementation to inject. And as much as possible, depend on virtual packages. Anyone read this book? A few people? All the other people that make packages, they should read this book, because it's full of design principles, like you have solid principles for OOP. There's a ton of principles for packages as well. So this book is full of it. So as a small recap for my entire presentation, I started with some beginner steps. You're no longer newbies. Then I went on with some intermediate tips. I could have included a lot more, but I decided to make it short. And then I talked to you about decoupling for stability. So, one more thing. I'm super excited. This is no longer technical, because on the 1st of November, I will run the New York Marathon. I'm not doing it for myself, I'm doing it for these people. These are the Medi-clowns. These clowns go to sick children at home and cheer them up, which is something that I would never be possible to do. These guys are amazing. So running the 26 miles for me is a lot harder, whatever. It's a lot harder than, no, cheering up the children is a lot harder than running the 26 miles. That's it. So I'm raising money for these guys because they don't have government grants, so they really depend on donations. So thank you. Time for questions. Hi.
Hi. So, what sort of training regime do you need to do for the running? How many times a week do you get out there and that sort of thing?
I run 5 times a week now. I use the Macmillan training. You can Google it. It's a well-known marathon trainer.
So you're not a Strava or a Runkeeper person then? Personally, I prefer Strava over Runkeeper.
I'm using Strava.
You're Strava?
Yeah.
If you didn't Strava, it didn't happen.
Sorry? More questions?
About the virtual packages.
Sorry, wave at me, please. Okay.
Hi, so you don't want to log in with Guzzle, but so you have to require people to require your own SD key and one of the adapters.
Yeah.
And to inject it yourself in the package. Don't you think it makes it harder for people to install, or do you want to give a default option or something?
Yes. There's a PHP HTTP discovery package, which installs a custom composer installer, which will look for an HTTP client, which will then install the adapter as well. So the installation could happen by automated, but it still needs to be wired up by the client, by the user. Yes.
Hi. So you mentioned earlier about 3 environments: local environment, continuous integration environment or testing, and production.
Yes.
So what about local tests? Do you have a different environment for this, or are you using the same test environment which is used also for the continuous integration tests?
Basically, whatever tests you have, you want it to be run in an automated way on CI, so I don't see any reason for local-only tests. Do you have any example?
Well, the setup might be different because you need to have a different database. For example, do you have a separate database on your local system which is used only for the tests?
In the case of an application, in the case of a package, I don't see any.
Yeah, I'm not talking about the package.
Maybe we can talk after that.
Yeah, sure. Thanks.
I have a question. Oh, sorry.
Wave.
I'll wait.
Wave at me, please.
Oh, no, I said I'll wait.
Okay. Sorry.
So I can clearly see the value in using an interface than choosing a certain concrete implementation, using adapters, of course. And that works perfectly in the case of HTTP, but how about, and the question is there an interface for every single package that you might find?
Oh, no.
So what would you do in that case?
There's a couple of use cases like HTTP, logging and caching and file system, but there's like queuing. You can use a queue interface. You can invent your own interface and then let other people make an implementation for like the Laravel queuing system or the Bernard queuing system. There's a couple of implementations there as well, so you can invent your own interfaces as well. Does that answer your question?
Yes, exactly. Following up to that, when we talk about interfaces, are they like community-driven interfaces or more like official interfaces, if that's a word?
Yeah, so in the case of logging, there's the PSR interface by the framework interrupts group. In the case of HTTP, there's the PHP HTTP movement, or it's just a bunch of people with a GitHub organization. You can also start your own movement. So it's mostly, if they're trying to make something that's used by more people, then create an own organization, or propose it to the FIG, or make your own interface and use it yourself, and don't expose the others. There's a couple of options. Okay. More questions?
I got one. So, what is your opinion about package-specific? Oh, sorry, up here.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi, Mitchell.
So, what is your opinion about package-specific exceptions that implement just one interface? So, you have a good example is a backup manager package, maybe. Let's say you have a backup manager exception. That's just the interface name. What if all of your exceptions implement that? Like, is that a good practice in your opinion, or
I think
should other
that
packages do this as well? I have no idea.
So in the case of the PHP HTTP client, there's a base exception, and every adapter, if there's some sort of exception thrown, it should implement that exception, or extend it at least. So I'm pro package-specific exceptions, yes. Does that answer your question, Mitchell? More questions?
Hi, I've just got a question regarding if you're publishing your own virtual packages, that's kind of defining the signatures and the way that they're supposed to be used. How would you maybe describe a methodology for doing tests with your virtual packages? Like how the interfaces, when implemented, should behave?
You can mock stuff that implements a certain interface. For example, you can use mockery to make a mock implementation of something. Or was that?
So in that case, the person consuming the interface, making their own implementation, would be responsible for their own tests. I mean, in the case of publishing your virtual package, how would you provide tests?
Well,
in that
you
case?
cannot publish your virtual package. It doesn't exist. It's a concept.
Mm-hmm. I'm thinking in the case of, say, Illuminate contracts, where it's just a virtual package published which declares how all the methods and such should be used.
Well, the benefit of interfaces, I'm sorry, I still don't get your question, but let me say this. The benefit of interfaces is that you cannot test it because it's not an implementation.
Yeah, that's right. So if I'm supposed to be implementing this interface, there's still my implementation itself would have some expected behavior which should satisfy some tests or some criteria to make sure I haven't messed up my implementation while still satisfying the interface. That was more. Maybe I can talk about it afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You should actually test your implementation, yes. And it's your responsibility. Yeah.
Hi. I first have a question about choosing a vendor name. Would you always create a new organization, or
No.
choose existing organization, or maybe use your GitHub username? Is there any?
You can use your GitHub username. A lot of people do that. No problem.
And I also maybe have an idea about the previous question.
Yeah.
What you could do maybe is that you create a test folder in your virtual package that has an abstract test class, and then when you want to test if your implementation is doing the correct stuff, returning the correct implementation, for example, then you could extend that abstraction maybe.
So your virtual package cannot contain anything, but what you could do is create a package which includes implementation tests for any adapter. That's something that you can do, actually. That's a good suggestion. Thank you. One more. Yeah,
Okay,
it's
I think it would do us all good if you explained how would one create a virtual package, since I think there's a confusion between creating a package that contains only interfaces and the virtual package concept you mentioned. Is it something you create in packages, or it's a real package that you create and
To be honest,
publish?
to be honest, I haven't created my own virtual package yet, because that's something that's not been done often. I think there's 5 virtual packages on Packagist, so I don't have any personal experience. If someone knows, please come tell me. I think something reasonable would be that if someone publishes a package that provides this to packages.org, that it would find out and say, oh, there's supposed to be a virtual package called this, and then it would create it. That's a reasonable explanation, but I don't know whether that's what's happening in actual real life. More questions? Nope? Okay, thank you very much.